Jennifer, thank you very much. Jennifer Griffin, following those developments. I want to explore that a little bit more with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, the former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, former Delta Force commander, among his bestsellers, Strong and Courageous General. This has just started now. We're 72 hours or so into this. I did want to first get your take on what Jennifer just touched on at the end. This is actually a rallying cry for many in the Arab world, especially those who look at Hamas as sort of this David against Goliath and pulling off this tragedy that to them seems like a victory.
Yeah, I think it does, Neil. And, it's very disappointing that we don't see more support coming out of some of the Arab countries, particularly those in the Abraham Accords that have essentially agreed to cooperate with Israel in the event of an attack. And I think that what you're seeing, though, is what we probably should have expected from them, and that is that they still have a deep, deep hatred for Israel, and I don't think that that's something that they can get over in any time soon.
General, what do you think of what Hamas pulled off? Crudely, say what you will about it, apparently unbeknownst to top intelligence officials, or, that there's plenty of time to examine that, much as we did after 9/11. But to what end? I mean, Hamas had to know the response in Israel would be tenfold, 100-fold, and it will probably be just that. They weighed that, obviously. Their backers, whoever they were and are, weighed that, fully thinking maybe that this would galvanize the Arab world, much as 50 years ago after the Yom Kippur War, the Arab world united, behind what was going on and rallied against the United States and other Western powers, started the oil embargo itself that would famously lead to the long gas lines we remember from 1973 and a global recession that would follow. So they had to weigh all of that, right?
They did. They did. And I think we need to understand that when they decided that they were going to do this, they probably did more reconnaissance, more precise rehearsals, and everything it takes to do something that is this complex. This is a complex operation, and I believe that you said it. You just said it, and that is, while people say, well, they want to destroy Israel, well, they can't. Unless they have a nuclear weapon, they can't. They really can't, because they fought against 5 nations at a time, at least in one war that they fought, the Israelis, that is.
Right.
And so I think that what they wanted to do was what you just said. They want to polarize the Arab world against all things Israel, and I don't think that they have any notion that they can destroy Israel. And people keep saying that, but how would they do that, and what would they do that? But I'll say this as the last thing. Everybody, to include our president, if in fact he asked for moderation and proportionality or whatever terms he used, is the dead wrong approach to this. Because if they don't clean this place out, that being Gaza and the Hamas people that are living in Gaza, if they don't clean that out now, they're going to get it again, but they're going to have the advantage of knowing what some of the techniques that they could use would do and how successful they were in this, and that is a leg up for them.
General, you're very good at the psychology of war itself and figuring out the intent of people who wish us ill. And I wonder, just your own expertise, what you read into when we withdrew, haphazardly from Afghanistan, to say nothing of the fight internally we're going through now on defense spending, and as Ukraine wrote the fight, and et cetera. How much does that weigh into our enemy's thought as to whether we just don't have the stomach for this thing, or am I overreading that?
I don't think you're overreading it at all, Neil. I think that probably the withdrawal from Afghanistan had a significant impact on the ultimate decision to do this. And I think that they see us as being weak, of having weak leadership, and not being willing to stand up to those who have openly threatened us, and in fact, the Iranians in particular, that have openly said at the United Nations that they would destroy America too. And so I think that you're right on in that regard.
All right. So when the president talks about, General, we stand unequivocally behind, Israel, and we will do whatever it takes. Obviously, he's saying we will stand behind them militarily, and I assume provide the same support we do. But I'm wondering what it could mean going forward, whether more will be called on us than what we've given and done in the past.
Yeah. Listen, the president says that he stands with Israel. It's unequivocal. But then look at the fact that when he first came into office, the first thing he did was he helped the enemies of Israel, the one nation that may actually have the methodology and the technology to be able to truly destroy Israel, and that would be with a nuclear weapon, which I certainly hope and pray that that is not ever going to be seen again. But I think that the fact that he has not recognized yet just how dangerous Iran is, and has played right into their hands, and here we are. And I don't believe that the money, the $6 billion, was the final motivation for them doing this. And we know that they actually haven't withdrawn in. But I would also say we're not stupid as American people. We can figure this out for ourselves. And that is, regardless of whether they gave them any money ahead of time, if they promised them money out of this money that was released to them as a result of our foreign policy on that, I think that they could do this and still sometime in the future draw on that money. And I don't think that we actually have any real method of stopping them without going back on a promise that we made.
General, do you think that the Israelis were simply caught off guard for this type of attack, that they had this dome and the sophistication to knock missiles out of the sky, but they weren't prepared for crude, soldiers and gliders, and many on motorcycles and mopeds right on the ground?
Neil, I don't think I've ever talked to you about this, but I lived over there with the Golani Brigade for a period of time, and I worked with the intel organizations there in Israel as well. And I got to tell you, they were first rate. They were the best intel service probably in the world, and we were right behind them. And I believe that what has occurred here, I was appalled when I saw that this had happened, and they had no forewarning at all. And I believe that what has happened, and I talked to a group of Jewish people last night about this, and they all agreed, the internal turmoil in their Knesset with Bibi Netanyahu and others that have been in some, I think, some pretty nasty disagreements. I think that internal turmoil caused the Israelis to take their eye off the ball. And when they took their eye off the ball, you don't get a redo on that. And I think that's why they missed it. They didn't see it. They have human intelligence all over Israel. They have human intelligence in the surrounding countries that is better than any I've ever seen. But they took their eye off the ball this time, and they're paying for it now. And God bless them. They're going to win this, but it's going to be at a great cost, and they are going in for a ground war. They have to.
That would appear to be the case. General, thank you very much. Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, the former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.